Welcome to Back on the Stack, a cEDH channel. The group got together online again to record some spicy cEDH action. We hope you enjoy watching it as much as we enjoyed playing it. Let's get right into it and see what decks are being piloted tonight.
Hey everyone, it's Eli, and tonight I'm piloting Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff. The game plan is to make lots of mana very quickly and turn that into a Reanimator line or win with Bolas' Citadel. For this game, I kept a basic Plains, Unmarked Grave, Chromox, Deadly Relic, a basic Swamp, Archivist of Ogma, and a Blind Obedience. The biggest reason I kept this hand is a turn 1 Lotho along with a card draw engine that I can cast turn 2.
I'm J-Rock. You may recognize my voice. Tonight I'm playing Nixilis, Captive Kingpin. The deck has a few win cons, including the All Will Be One enchantment combo and a Twin Flame Dualcaster combo. But the most consistent is some sort of dockside loop and sinking the mana either into Walking Ballista or using one of the many creatures that hurt opponents when artifacts are sacrificed. For my opening hand, I kept Gutshot, Basic Swamp, Conqueror's Flail, Gemstone Caverns, Tainted Peak, Mountain, and my London Mulligan was a Snuff Out. The Gemstone Caverns and Conqueror's Flail were both cards that kept my attention when I decided to keep this, but the number one reason was actually the Gutshot. Knowing Eli was probably going to get Lotho out turn 1 and create a ton of treasures, I was going to be able to stop it right away.
What's up, everybody? My name is Raij, and tonight I'm going to be playing Raggadragga. This is a very creature toolbox deck. There's a ton of creature tutors, and I can go grab whatever I need to suit the occasion. There's combo pieces, some stacks pieces, depending on how the game flows. My opening hand for game 1 tonight, I'm keeping my second 7. We got 2 lands, Dryad Arbor and Mountain. Then we have a Soul Ring, Viridian Joiner, Marwyn the Nurturer, Endurance, and a Dockside Extortionist. So the only awkward part about this hand is that in order to guarantee green mana for turn 2, I have to basically do nothing for my first turn and just play the Dryad Arbor. But then we do have a very explosive turn 2 potential. We got the Soul Ring, the Dockside, and then we also have the Marwyn and Viridian Joiner, which are like 2 of the best mana dorks in the deck. They can do a lot of different combos with my commander.
Howdy, my name's Levi, and today I am playing the partner pair of Bruse and Thrasios. The goal of this deck is pretty simple. Get past turn 3, make infinite mana, and put it into Thrasios. I kept an opening hand with a Grand Abolisher, Recruit of the Guard, Wooded Foothills, Eladamri's Call, Breeding Pool, Mox Diamond, and an Arid Mesa. I kept this hand because I have the Eladamri's Call on turn 1 for a hopeful turn 2 Dockside, with the Lotho player and the Nixilis player both hopefully feeding me some artifacts.
With introductions out of the way, Eli will kick us off. But first, J-Rock has a pregame action and puts a Gemstone Caverns on the battlefield with a luck counter, exiling a basic Mountain. Eli draws and plays a basic Plains for turn. He casts Chromox. It ETBs and he imprints Nadir's Nightblade. He casts his commander, Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff. He passes the turn. J-Rock draws and plays Tainted Peak for turn. He pays 2 life and casts Gutshot, targeting Lotho. It resolves and Eli sadly moves his little treasure machine back to the command zone. J-Rock casts a Conqueror's Flail. He passes the turn. Raij draws and plays a Dryad Arbor. He passes. Levi draws and plays a City of Brass. He casts Mox Diamond. It ETBs and he discards a Breeding Pool. He passes the turn. Eli draws and plays a basic Swamp for turn. He passes. J-Rock draws, also plays a basic Swamp, and also passes the turn. Raij draws and plays a basic Mountain. He casts a Soul Ring. He casts Viridian Joiner. He moves to his end step, but in response, Levi casts Eladamri's Call. In response to that, Eli flashes in an Archivist of Ogma. It resolves and Levi tutors up a Phyrexian Metamorph into hand. Archivist triggers and Eli gains 1 life and draws a card. The turn moves to Levi. Levi draws and plays a Wooded Foothills. He taps it, pays a life, and fetches a tropical island onto the battlefield. Archivist triggers and Eli gains a life and draws a card. Levi loses a life through City of Brass and casts a Grand Abolisher. With the table now on edge, he passes the turn? Eli draws and casts Blind Obedience. He moves to combat and swings Archivist at Levi. He declares no blocks and takes 2. Eli passes the turn. J-Rock draws and plays an Ancient Tomb for turn. He taps it, losing 2 life to help cast his commander, Nixilis, Captive Kingpin. It enters tapped due to blind obedience. He passes the turn. Raij draws and casts his commander, Raggadragga, Gorgut's boss. He then taps Viridian Joiner for 3 green, now that it is buffed through Raggadragga. He casts Marwyn the Nurturer. He passes the turn. Levi draws and plays Arid Mesa for turn. He taps it, pays a life, and sacks it. Nixilis triggers, J-Rock puts a +1/+1 counter on him, and exiles the top card of his library, which is Emergent Zone. Levi then fetches up a Savannah onto the battlefield. Archivist triggers, Eli gains a life, and draws a card. Levi casts Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy. He taps City of Brass, losing a life and triggering Nixilis. J-Rock puts a counter on Ob and exiles Faithless Looting from the top of his library. Levi then pays 2 more life to help cast a Phyrexian Metamorph. It resolves, and he has it enter as a copy of Archivist of Ogma. He passes the turn. Eli draws and plays Fetid Heath for turn. He recasts his commander, Lotho. He casts Deadly Relic, targeting Nixilis. Lotho triggers on cast, and Eli loses a life and creates a treasure token. Ob triggers from the life loss, and J-Rock adds another counter and exiles Bergi, God of Storytelling. Deadly Relic resolves, and Ob is returned to the command zone. Eli moves to combat and swings Archivist at J-Rock. He takes 2 life. Eli moves through phases and passes the turn. J-Rock draws and plays City of Brass for turn. He takes 2 life through Ancient Tomb to help cast Jeska's Will, targeting Eli, choosing to add red mana to his pool equal to the number of cards in Eli's hand. It resolves and he adds 6 red mana. He recasts his commander, Nixilis. Lotho triggers and Eli loses a life and creates a treasure token. J-Rock equips Conqueror's Flail to Ob. He moves to the end step, and the exiled cards through Ob will now stay in exile for good. He passes the turn. Raij draws and casts Gamble. It resolves, and during his search he finds and casts Panglacial Worm, a cEDH staple. Gamble resolves and Raij randomly discards Final Fortune. With Gamble now resolved, Lotho triggers from Rage's second spell. Ob triggers and J-Rock adds a 1/1 counter and exiles a basic swamp. Both Archivist triggers resolve, and Eli and Levi both gain a life and draw a card. Raggadragga triggers now resolve from the cast of Panglacial Worm, and Raij targets Viridian Joiner, untapping it and giving it +7/+7 and trample until the end of turn. He then taps the Viridian Joiner for 10 green mana. He casts Tooth and Nail, paying the additional Entwine cost. Raggadragga triggers, and Raij targets Viridian Joiner again, untapping it and giving it an additional 7/7 until end of turn. In response to the cast, Eli cracks all of his treasures to flash in Aven Mind Sensor. It resolves, and Raij searches the top 4 cards of his library. He finds and reveals a Delighted Halfling. He finishes resolving the second half of Tooth and Nail by putting both Dockside Extortionist and Manglehorn into play. Both Archivist triggers resolve, and Eli and Levi both gain a life and draw a card. Dockside ETBs, and Raij creates 5 treasures, which come in tapped due to blind obedience. Manglehorn ETBs, and Raij destroys J-Rock's Conqueror's Flail. Raij moves to combat and swings a 17/18 Viridian Joiner with trample at Eli, and Raggadragga at J-Rock. They both declare no blocks and take the damage. Raij passes the turn. Levi draws and plays a Taiga for turn. He casts his commander, Thrasios, Triton Hero. He passes. Eli draws and plays a Scrubland for turn. He casts Lotus Petal. He taps all of his creatures to help convoke Hoarding Broodlord. Lotho triggers and Eli loses a life and creates a tapped treasure token. Ob triggers and J-Rock adds a counter and exiles Badlands. Broodlord ETBs, and Eli searches his library for a card and then exiles it face down. Levi's Archivist triggers, he gains a life and draws a card. Eli then taps Broodlord to help convoke Sacrifice, targeting Broodlord. It resolves, and he adds 8 black mana to his pool. He casts Necromancy, targeting the Broodlord. In response, Raij evokes Endurance by exiling Delighted Halfling, targeting Eli's grave. It resolves, Eli shuffles his graveyard under the bottom of his library, and Necromancy fizzles. Eli then casts Sheoldred the Apocalypse, using a floating black to extort it through blind obedience. His opponents each lose 1 life, and he gains 3. Nixilis triggers, J-Rock adds a counter to Ob, and exiles Calling the Weak. Eli passes the turn. J-Rock draws and loses 2 life through Sheoldred. He casts Soul Ring. He plays Badlands from exile. He moves through phases and passes the turn. Raij draws and loses 2 life through Sheoldred. He casts Finale of Devastation, where X equals 10. Raggadragga triggers and he targets Viridian Joiner. However, with the trigger on the stack, Levi taps the City of Brass, losing a life. Ob triggers and J-Rock adds a counter and exiles Fire Covenant. Levi then activates Thrasios, revealing and drawing Ranger Captain of Eos, losing 2 life through Sheoldred. It is at this point that Eli and Levi both plead with J-Rock to cast the Fire Covenant to at least get rid of the Viridian Joiner. However, with only 25 life remaining, he must choose his targets wisely. He decides to cast the Fire Covenant for 16. He targets Manglehorn, Viridian Joiner, Dockside, Marwyn, Kinnan, Grand Abolisher, and Lotho, going down to 9 life. It resolves, killing the targets. Raggadragga's trigger now fizzles, and Finale resolves. Raij chooses to search only his graveyard through Finale, returning Manglehorn to the battlefield. It ETBs and destroys Levi's Phyrexian Metamorph. He moves to combat and swings the Worm at J-Rock and both Raggadragga and Dryad Arbor at Levi. Levi takes 27, and J-Rock, already regretting flipping over Fire Covenant, is eliminated. In his second main phase, Raij casts Eternal Witness. It ETBs and he returns Viridian Joiner to hand. He passes the turn. Levi draws and loses 2 through Sheoldred. He casts Ranger Captain of Eos. It ETBs and he searches the top 4 of his library due to Mind Sensor. He fails to find. Eli's Archivist triggers, he gains a life and draws a card. He casts Birds of Paradise. Levi passes the turn. Eli untaps and in his upkeep casts Enlightened Tutor. It resolves and he puts Animate Dead on the top of his library. Levi asks the group if he should crack Ranger Captain, but he realizes that he is now in a position to either crack the Captain and King make Raij, or not crack the Captain and basically let Eli present the win. Eli convinces him that if he does not crack now, Eli will cast a board wipe. Playing to his outs, Levi takes no action. Eli draws for turn and gains 2 life through Sheoldred. He plays a basic Plains for turn. He casts Unmarked Grave. He searches his library and puts Hoarding Broodlord into his graveyard. He casts Animate Dead, targeting the Broodlord. It ETBs and Eli searches his library for a card face down and puts it into exile. He convokes the exiled card, which is a Saw in Half, targeting Broodlord. Both Broodlord tokens ETB and he tutors for 2 cards and puts them into exile face down. He then convokes one of the Broodlord tokens to cast Sacrifice, targeting the token and adding 8 black to his mana pool. He taps creatures to help convoke an overloaded Dam. In response, Levi now cracks the Ranger Captain. With the board now wiped clean, Eli passes the turn. Raij draws and passes the turn. Levi draws and casts Recruiter of the Guard. It ETBs and he fetches up an Esper Sentinel into hand. He casts the Esper. He passes the turn. Eli draws and casts Talisman of Hierarchy, extorting it through blind obedience. Levi loses his last life and is eliminated. Raij loses 1 and Eli gains 2. Eli passes the turn. Raij draws and passes. In his end step though, Eli casts a Vampiric Tutor. He tutors a card to the top of his library and loses 2 life. The turn moves to Eli. Eli draws and immediately casts Bolas's Citadel. He loses 2 life and casts Fracture from the top of his library, targeting Raij's Soul Ring. Eli loses 2 more life and casts Dauntless Dismantler from the top of his library. He passes the turn. Raij draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs for turn. He taps it, pays a life, and fetches up a Taiga onto the battlefield. He casts Wild Growth on his basic mountain. He casts a Bird of Paradise. He passes the turn. Eli draws for turn and plays a Gemstone Caverns. He loses 3 life and casts Black Market Connections from the top of his library. He pays 2 life to cast Draneth from the top of his library. He recasts his commander, Lotho, extorting it through blind obedience. He passes. Raij draws and plays a Wooded Foothills for turn. He casts Viridian Joiner again. He passes the turn. Eli draws and Black Market Connections triggers. He loses 2 life and draws a card through Black Market. He plays a basic Plains for turn. He pays 2 life and casts Tainted Pact from the top of his library. He exiles cards from the top of his library until he hits Sensei's Divining Top. He casts the top. He taps top, drawing a card and putting Sensei's on top of his library. He then pays 1 life to cast the top through boluses. He does it one more time. Eli then pays 2 life to cast Demonic Tutor from the top of his library. He tutors up a card into hand and then casts Aether Flux Reservoir. Eli then presents a loop where he puts Sensei's top on the top of his library, casts it through boluses for 1 life, but then gains more life through Aether Flux. He continues to do this until he has over 50 life. He pays 50 life into Aether Flux and does 50 damage to Raij's face. Being the last man standing, Eli wins the game. The pod was eager to play another game, so we randomized turn order and tried again.
Alright, this is Raij again, and we're going to be running back Raggadragga for game 2. So this time we had to mulligan down to 5. We're going to be keeping a Command Tower, Elvish Spirit Guide, Invasion of Ikoria, Natural Order, and Heronblade Elite. And then we're going to be putting a Vexing Shusher and a Manglehorn on the bottom of my library. Vexing Shusher, really not that great in this pod. There's only 1 blue player, so I'm not too concerned with counterspells. And Manglehorn is a pretty good Staxy creature, but I have 2 creature tutors in the hand. I would much rather keep those, and if I need the Manglehorn, I can go grab them. The hand that I'm keeping is a little light on mana. We only really have the Command Tower and the Spirit Guide. So I'm actually a little tempted to turn 1, use those 2, and just Invasion for 0 to go grab a Dryad Arbor, just have a permanent second mana source. We'll see how that goes. This may or may not work out.
For game number 2, I kept an Opposition Agent, a Calling the Weak, Wishclaw Talisman, City of Brass, Mana Crypt, a Basic Plains, and a Necromancy. The idea behind keeping this hand is a turn 1 Opposition Agent, turn 2 Lotho, along with the Wishclaw Talisman and Calling the Weak to hopefully be able to put some sort of win attempt on the stack on turn 3.
Howdy, Levi again. This time around I mulled to 6, and I kept a starting hand with a Command Tower, Mystic Remora, Sacred Foundry, Noxious Revival, Force of Will, Gaia's Cradle, and for my London Mulligan, I threw away a Savine's Reclamation. I need this fish to be fed. I'm in 3rd seat, and this Mystic Remora is really my only hope for getting a game plan together.
For game number 2, I kept a Cursed Totem, Tainted Peak, Basic Swamp, Grim Tutor, Animate Dead, and a Mana Crypt. The reason I kept the hand was because I knew turn 1 I could go Mana Crypt into Cursed Totem, shutting down all the Mana Dorks and Thrasios, and have a turn 2 Nixilis myself, so I decided to keep it. With opening hands decided, Raij will kick us off. He draws and plays Command Tower. He casts Carpet of Flowers. He passes. Eli draws and plays a City of Brass for turn. He casts Mana Crypt. He passes. Levi draws and plays Command Tower for turn. He taps it to cast Mystic Remora. He passes the turn. J-Rock draws and plays a basic Swamp. He casts Mana Crypt. Fish triggers and Levi draws. He casts a Cursed Totem. Fish triggers and Levi draws. J-Rock then passes the turn. Raij draws and plays a Shatter Skull the Hammer Pass, bolting himself to have it come in untapped. He exiles Elvish Spirit Guide from his hand, adding 1 green to his mana pool. He then casts Heronblade Elite. He attempts to move through phases, but in response, Eli flashes in an Opposition Agent. The turn moves to Eli. In his upkeep, Eli wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and plays a basic Plains. He casts his commander, Lotho. He then taps both of his creatures to help convoke Benny Brax, Zoologist. Lotho triggers and Eli loses a life and creates a treasure token. He moves to his end step and Benny Brax triggers. Eli draws a card and passes the turn. In his upkeep, Levi pays for fish. He draws and shocks in a Sacred Foundry. He passes the turn. In his upkeep, J-Rock loses his crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Tainted Peak for turn. He casts his commander, Nixilis. He passes the turn. Raij draws and simply passes the turn. In his upkeep, Eli wins his crypt roll. He draws and plays a Marsh Flats. He taps it, pays 1 life, and sacks it. Nixilis triggers, J-Rock puts a +1/+1 counter on and exiles the top card of his library, which is a Dark Ritual. Eli then fetches up a Scrubland onto the battlefield. He casts Ranger Captain of Eos. It ETBs and he tutors a Serra Ascendant into hand. He casts the Serra Ascendant. Lotho triggers and he loses a life and creates a treasure token. Nixilis triggers and J-Rock adds a counter and exiles a Toxic Deluge. Eli moves to combat and swings 8 at Levi. He declares no blocks and takes it. Eli moves to his end step. Then he bracks triggers and Eli draws a card. The turn moves to Levi. In his upkeep, Levi pays for the fish. He draws and plays a Gaia's Cradle for turn. With 7 cards in hand, he passes. In his upkeep, J-Rock wins his Crypt roll. He draws and casts Toxic Deluge, paying 3 life to give all creatures -3/-3. Deluge resolves and wipes the board of everything except Nixilis and Serra Ascendant. J-Rock moves to combat and swings at Raij. He takes 6 damage. In his second main phase, J-Rock plays Emergent Zone for turn. He passes. Raij draws and passes. In his upkeep, Eli loses his Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and recasts his commander, Lotho. He moves to combat and declares Serra Ascendant at J-Rock. But in response, J-Rock casts a Deadly Relic, targeting Serra Ascendant. Fish triggers and Levi draws. It resolves, and Eli passes the turn. In his upkeep, Levi does not pay for the Mystic Remora upkeep, and it is sacrificed. He draws and plays a Volcanic Island for turn. He casts his commander, Thrasios, Triton Hero. He casts Devoted Druid. Lotho triggers and Eli loses a life, and creates a treasure token. Triggers and J-Rock adds a counter to and exiles Burgi, God of Storytelling. Levi moves to his end step, discarding Recruiter of the Guard to hand size, and passes the turn. In his upkeep, J-Rock loses his Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and casts Burgi from exile. He casts Disciple of the Vault. Burgi triggers and he adds 1 red. Lotho triggers and Eli loses a life and creates a treasure token. Triggers and J-Rock adds a counter and exiles Jewel Lotus. With Disciple of the Vault on the stack, Eli cracks a treasure and casts Vampiric Tutor. He tutors a card to the top of his library and loses 2 life. Disciple then resolves. J-Rock casts the Jewel Lotus from exile. Burgi triggers and he adds another red mana. He casts Sardian Avenger. Burgi triggers and he adds another red. He moves to combat and swings in the air at Eli. Eli declares no blocks and takes 8. J-Rock passes the turn. Raij draws and adds 1 green to his pool through Carpet. He plays Cavern of Souls, naming Human. He casts Invasion of Ikoria, where X equals 2. He gives the battle to Eli to defend. Raij tutors Dockside Extortionist to the battlefield. It ETBs and he creates 6 treasures. The table reminds him that for every treasure he cracks, Sardian Avenger and Disciple of the Vault will trigger, giving J-Rock 2 triggers. He decides to keep them up and passes the turn. In his upkeep, Eli wins his Crypt roll. He draws and plays Grand Abolisher. In response, Levi casts Force of Will for its alternate casting cost, losing a life and exiling Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy. Triggers and J-Rock adds a counter and exiles Orcish Bowmasters. Force resolves and counters Abolisher. Eli taps the City of Brass to add 1 black and loses 1 life. Triggers and J-Rock adds a counter and exiles Saw in half. Eli casts Necromancy, targeting Grand Abolisher. Lotho triggers and Eli loses a life and creates a treasure token. Triggers, J-Rock adds a counter and exiles Red Elemental Blast. Eli cracks a treasure and adds a black mana. Sardian Avenger and Disciple of the Vault both trigger, each pinging Eli in the face for 1. Triggers for each ping, J-Rock adds 2 counters and exiles a basic mountain and a Badlands. Eli casts Culling the Weak, targeting Lotho. He adds 4 black to his pool. He casts Wishclaw Talisman. He activates it and gives it to Raij. Eli tutors a card into hand and passes his turn. Levi draws and plays Bloodstained Mire. He taps it, loses a life, and sacks it. Triggers, J-Rock adds a counter and exiles a basic mountain. Levi tutors a Taiga to the battlefield. He casts his own Grand Abolisher. In response, Eli is forced to use what he tutored for and cracks a treasure for white. Sardian Avenger and Disciple both trigger. J-Rock sends 1 ping at Eli and 1 ping at Levi. Triggers for each ping, and J-Rock adds 2 more counters and exiles Wheel of Fortune and Mayhem Devil. Eli then casts Swords to Plowshares, targeting Devoted Druid. This is where J-Rock reminds them that Cursed Totem is still in play, and Levi is unable to present a win through Thrasios anyway. Swords resolves and exiles Devoted Druid. A very sad Levi then passes the turn. In his upkeep, J-Rock wins his Crypt roll. He draws and plays a Badlands from exile. He casts Grim Tutor. Burgi triggers and he adds 1 red. He tutors a card into hand and loses 3 life. He then casts Dockside Extortionist. Burgi triggers and he adds a red. The table debates on if they should crack any treasures, but ultimately decide that an extra 7 treasures for J-Rock is better than an extra 14 cards through Ob. Dockside ETBs, and J-Rock creates 11 treasures. He then casts Saw in Half, targeting Dockside. Bergie triggers and he adds a red. It resolves and J-Rock creates 2 copies of Dockside, adding an additional 22 treasures. He cracks 3 treasures, triggering Disciple of the Vault 3 times, and J-Rock chooses to ping Eli 3 times. Ob triggers and J-Rock exiles Hoarding Broodlord, Gutshot, and Dothy. J-Rock then explains that for every treasure he cracks, Disciple and Mayhem Devil will both allow him to ping an opponent. He cracks 29 treasures, sending 31 damage at Raij and 27 at Levi. Ob Nixilis triggers 58 times. He moves to combat and swings a massive Ob Nixilis at Eli. Eli takes it, and J-Rock wins the game. In the first game, Raij was able to show off the power and capabilities of Raggadragga, a commander that should not be slept on. However, Eli was able to politic himself into a position to grind out a few more turns and ultimately defeat Raij heads up. In the second game, J-Rock was able to show why Ob Nixilis may be the best Rakdos commander in the format, having massive card advantage in the command zone. Turns out, Dockside wins games. We hope you enjoyed watching. Please leave comments letting us know what you enjoyed about the gameplay. We are always taking advice to tune our games into the best production that we can. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And we will see you back on the stack.